We okay here? This could move, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could move it. All right, so let's come back a little bit. Yeah. Should be okay.
Okay, good morning, members of the media who have joined us here at Opposition Leader's Office, and of course, members of the public who are joining us across all our social media platforms. We were last with you, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, and quite a lot has happened since then, occupying headlines and column pages across newspapers, lead stories, both in the news and, of course, stories across social media. And the opposition leader has brought members of the opposition here today to bring some clarification to more than a couple issues in the public domain. So let's begin, and I can ask our opposition leader to join us now.
Again, thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'd like to start by making reference to a statement by the Honourable Prime Minister on January 1st, specifically where the Honourable Prime Minister says that many persons, group politicians and businesses are profiting from drug trafficking and are fueling this anti-American narrative. The Honourable Prime Minister went on to say that it is not surprising that the PNM, a party long suspected of being financed by local drug mafia and connected to numerous allegations of pedophilia, will be against our anti-drug and anti-human trafficking efforts. They are concerned with covering up allegations of pedophilia within their hierarchy, as well as protecting the illegal profits of their drug mafia financiers and over the safety of citizens. Now, the reason why I started there is because, of course, this is a very serious allegation. And I want to make it abundantly clear to the Honourable Prime Minister that statements of those nature should not be said if the evidence does not exist. And we are very certain in our minds that this is a distraction. Now, and I also want to put on record that I'm going to be exploring my options as leader of the People's National Movement as it relates to the issue of defamation. Because this is the second time the Honourable Prime Minister has made this allegation, and the Prime Minister is attempting to convince the public that there is an anti-American sentiment as it relates to the People's National Movement, and that is absolutely false. And more importantly, when the Honourable Prime Minister gives the impression that we are not supportive of addressing issues relating to drug trafficking, narco trafficking, that is absolutely false. I want to remind the country that during the period 2015 to 2025, we can about the several pieces of legislation that have been passed to address these very same issues. What is interesting is if the media and the population recalls that period and the multiplicity of pieces of legislation that came to deal with the issue of drug trafficking, money laundering, most of the legislation presented by the People's National Movement were not supported by the UNC government. And I want to say to you that it's important for us to remember a couple pieces of those legislation. Anti-money laundering legislation, the Proceeds of Crime Act, dealing with the whole issue of tax evasion, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Act, the refusal of the UNC specifically to support the amendments to the SSA legislation, which dealt with joint patrols, serious crimes, and joint force operations. Isn't it very ironic that the same pieces of legislation that they didn't support, they are now using that legislation to have the same joint force operations? But at the time in the Parliament, they refused to support the bail amendment bill on more than one occasions, refusing to support legislation to deal with special courts and virtual courts, and also refusing to support and challenging the criminal proceedings legislation. As a matter of fact, you may or may not recall that it is now Minister Sturge who challenged those criminal proceedings, that piece of legislation, in court, and lost. It is therefore our view that putting forward this particular position as it relates to the People's National Movement is not only reckless, but it is calculated deliberately to cause a distraction because of where this government now finds itself. It was under the People's National Movement that we increased judges from 36 to 64 to ensure that the continuous outcry of the public as it relates to the length of time that court matters have been taking, that now could be addressed. And it is to the credit of the then former Attorney General Faris Alwari that you can check very clearly that there are some cases, criminal cases, that are actually completed within a year period. So to suggest to the public that we don't want to address human trafficking, and we don't want to address drug trafficking, and we don't want to deal with narco trafficking, it is absolutely mischievous, and the evidence is there to show that when they had the opportunity to deal with the pieces of legislation, they did not support it. It takes me, therefore, to what is causing the Honourable Prime Minister to go in this particular direction. And it has to do with the issue of the radar. Now let us look at what has happened since this government has assumed office. In September, the Honourable Prime Minister visited the United Nations, and on her return to Trinidad and Tobago, announced that a meeting was held with Secretary of State Mr. Rubio, and there were certain agreements. The government, the Honourable Prime Minister, spoke about support for cross-border gas deals with Venezuela. As a matter of fact, the Honourable Prime Minister indicated to the population of Trinidad and Tobago that at some point in time, the Honourable Prime Minister will be visiting Venezuela, and so too did the Minister of Energy, the Honourable Rudal Munilal. But let us leave September now and let us go to the month of October. On October the 23rd, Trinidad and Tobago, through the government, announced that the U.S. destroyer U.S. Gravely will dock for joint exercises. 26th, we understood that U.S. Marines disembarked, and later on that those exercises took place. On the 13th of November, the Trinidad and Tobago government announced the expansion of the U.S. TT Security Corporation. And in November, we had the visit of the Joint Chief General Dan Kane coming to Trinidad and Tobago to have discussions with our Honourable Prime Minister. The next day, there was a mystery U.S. military aircraft landing in Tobago. And we have now, I would say mainly through information coming out from the United States, have a clearer understanding as to exactly what happened in relation to the installation of a radar in Tobago. The Honourable Prime Minister gave us many different explanations for the installation of this radar. The most interesting of all is the fact that the Prime Minister had to keep this radar a secret. When pressed further about not informing the Chief Secretary of Tobago, the Prime Minister indicated that it was because he was not a member of the National Security Council. The public of Trinidad and Tobago needs to be made aware that it is about time the Prime Minister tells us what is the truth. Is it that when the U.S. Marines went to Tobago, whether or not they went to install the radar? Did they go there for road repairs? Did they go there to refuel that particular plane? What exactly did they go to Tobago for? And I want to ask some questions now about this radar. I want to make reference to USA Today, an article written by George Petrus, which specifies that this military radar, high-tech radar unit in the Caribbean, is a surveillance system that can monitor drug boats, as islands officially say, but could also be used in a conflict between the United States and Venezuela. That article, written on December the 2nd, which I can share with you, speaks of the fact that that radar can be set up in about 45 minutes. Specifically, the system is able to detect, track, and target the world's most sophisticated airborne threats in highly contested environments. It has a 360-degree maximum range of about 170 miles of air surveillance and tracking. The United States has built military force near Venezuela and has launched aerial strikes on at least 21 alleged drug boats. So that the information is there specifically as it relates to particulars about this radar. Now the question is, if it is the Prime Minister said I had to keep the radar a secret, the question that we must ask the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, what else is she keeping a secret from the people of Trinidad and Tobago? And it is only because of the pressure from the population and several persons that we found out about this radar. Not only that, the Prime Minister must tell the population why did she request that radar. We have been told that the radar installed in Tobago was the same radar that was going to be installed in Grenada. The people of Grenada protested because they had knowledge long in advance that the United States made a request of the government of Grenada and the Prime Minister to install that radar. And the Prime Minister had consultations with the public of Grenada who objected. The other question must be, why Tobago? Because we are aware that there is a state-of-the-art radar already established. And if it is the Prime Minister requested this radar, the Prime Minister must tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago why it is that the Prime Minister found it necessary to request such a reader. Several days have passed and we are yet to get an answer. And I am sure I can say comfortably that the population of Trinidad and Tobago is very interested in why that reader has been set up there. The Prime Minister wants to give the public the impression, as I said, that we are not interested in dealing with drug trafficking and narco trafficking. That is further from the truth. And the Prime Minister can make those statements, but she cannot run from accounting to the people of Trinidad and Tobago as to why she took that decision. It is not for her to simply say to us it's a secret. It's not for her to change her story. Because then the issue of trust becomes critical as it relates to a matter of security, national security. And it is also not good enough to tell the people of Tobago that you did not tell the Chief Secretary because he is not sitting on the Security Council. We will have our minority leader speaking shortly. But I want to say to the Honourable Prime Minister, who visited Tobago, if I recall correctly, last month, and indicated to the people of Tobago about autonomy and about the fact that you don't need a bill to decide on how much money is allocated to Tobago. The population of Trinidad and Tobago is entitled to know what did that reader cost, who installed that reader, whether any Trinidadian or Tobagonian has been trained to operate that reader. The people of Trinidad and Tobago are entitled to know what is happening to the data that is collected by that reader. The people of Trinidad and Tobago are entitled to know where would that information be installed and whether Trinidad and Tobago has any access to that reader. The people of Trinidad and Tobago also need to know where is the data being collected and where is the data being processed. We in the People's National Movement understand very clearly the issue of national security. We understand the importance of protecting our borders. And we understand that we have a responsibility to do all within our power to convince our population, not just now, but for the years that we have been in office, that we are very conscious of national security issues. And there is nothing that this government will do or can do to convince the population otherwise. I therefore am calling on the Honourable Prime Minister to come clean with the population and to tell us if there are any other secrets that you are hiding with us in relation to the radar and in relation to Tobago and in relation to the discussions that you recently had with the U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane, who visited Trinidad and Tobago on November the 25th, had a discussion with you. You told the public of Trinidad and Tobago that General Dan Kane, in his discussions with you, absolutely no mention was made about Venezuela. Isn't it ironic that a day later, this mystery U.S. military aircraft lands in Tobago, and shortly thereafter, the installation of the radar? So as members of the People's National Movement, we await these answers. We will not accept this Honourable Prime Minister causing distractions and creating mischief by accusing us of supporting any narco government and saying that we are involved in drug trafficking and that they are financiers who are involved in drug trafficking who have been supporting the People's National Movement. I close by saying to the Prime Minister, if you have the information, take it to the police. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Opposition Leader. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been speaking about Tobago, and as the Opposition Leader indicated, we do have Kelvin Morris on the line in Tobago. So I believe we will be bringing him up now, and he will be able to make his presentation to you. Kelvin?
Thank you, Honourable colleague, Opposition Leader, parliamentary colleagues, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Pleasant good afternoon and good morning, and it's indeed a pleasure to join you here in Tobago to discuss this very important matter of the installation of a military-type radar at the eastern end of the ANR International Airport. And all of this would have transpired without prior consultation with the people of Tobago by this UNC-TPP coalition government. And this issue has left the people of Tobago extremely traumatized. As a matter of fact, Tobagonians feel disrespected and also betrayed. And as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition would have properly reviewed and told us with respect to how we got here, it is that we in Tobago woke up one morning to thunderous roars of a plane soaring through the skies, departing the ANR International Airport. And at that moment, we became very terrified and horrified, because prior to that, we have not heard anything like that at that time of the morning. And therefore, when people started to inquire, the first set of information we got is from the Chief Secretary, who indicated that he had no prior knowledge of any military-type plane coming to Tobago. But at the same time, his information was that they came to refuel. And as you would recall, the media then sought to contact the Prime Minister, who categorically denied that there was any military presence in Tobago. And as the days went by and more information came to hand, the Prime Minister then changed her tune, and she told us that yes, there was in fact a military presence in Tobago, but it was to deal with the construction of a roadway. And further revelations by the media here in Tobago would have identified some type of military asset. And when I'm presented with that kind of irrefutable information, the Prime Minister had no choice but to concede and admit that unknowing to the rest of us, both here in Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago, she would have approved the installation of a military-grade warlike radar system at the brand new eastern end of the ANR International Terminal without any kind of consultation with the people of Tobago. And when we look at the Tobago House of Assembly Act, which empowers the Tobago House of Assembly with the responsibility for airports, seaports, roads, state lands, and related infrastructure, we recognize that notwithstanding the responsibilities of the Prime Minister as head of the National Security Council under the 6th schedule, because the airport falls under the 5th schedule of responsibility of the Tobago House of Assembly, she was duty-bound to consult with the Chief Secretary and at least inform him that such an undertaking was happening in Tobago. So the Prime Minister blatantly disregarded the people of Tobago, and the people of Tobago are currently living in fear because, notwithstanding that flight we heard one time, it appears that there continues to be the inflows of military planes, and I understand up to last evening there was some sighting of drones as well. And therefore, we in Tobago, we are asking the Prime Minister to come clean with us and tell us the truth as to what is really taking place in Tobago that requires such a high-level profile presence of foreign military presence on this island. As you know, Tobago is a tourism focused destination. Tobago is a peaceful, very loving and unified, harmonized environment. And we are saying in Tobago, we do not want that type of radar here, because notwithstanding what we are being told, we know that there are provisions for other type of radars that can fit the requirements of an international standard airport. And therefore, we find it very curious as to the timing, as to this installation of this military-style airport radar, while internationally there are certain things happening in the space between the US and Venezuela. And you are hearing the Chief Secretary trying to take himself out of this current arrangement. But I am saying to Tobagonians, we have some important questions for the Chief Secretary. And the question we want to ask the Chief Secretary today is pointedly, and he must respond truthfully, is notwithstanding that you and the Prime Minister have told the people of Trinidad and Tobago that you were not informed, did you at any period of time while that radar was being installed visited the premises of the ANR International Airport with the chairman of the airport's authority to view said radar system? And did you at that very meeting, when you went to the airport, met with military officials from the US? Because you see, at this time, there is a lot of misinformation and untruths that are being told about this story. And when you see the Prime Minister move from saying that there was no US presence to they are only here to pave road construction that has not started, and then admitting finally that they in fact installed a radar, you have to ask yourself, can we trust the word of these leaders? Can we trust the word of Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar and Mr. Farley Chavez Augustine? Because I will tell you this, and Tobagonians are looking on quite curiously, because you would remember and recall in the past, under former Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, this current Chief Secretary had a lot to say about matters that were less important. And therefore, his silence on this matter is quite curious. He even went as far as to lie and tell the nation that prior to this opportunity, where he was briefed by some members of the National Security Council, that it was in fact the first time he had had such a privilege. When last July, the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, brought the entire National Security Council to Tobago to meet specifically with the Chief Secretary, and also included the Office of the Minority Leader, where we were discussing very important matters as it relates to crime and crime prevention in Tobago. So therefore, we are asking Farley to have the same energy you had for Dr. Rowley. Where is that energy for Kamla Persad-Bissessar? And Tobagonians are watching you with open eyes, because clearly you are telling Tobagonians that you are willing to accept anything that this current government does once it includes your UNC friends. And it is important that we look at the approach of Grenada as opposed to this approach by this current Prime Minister and Mr. Fale Chavez Agustin. In Grenada, it was public knowledge that a request came from the United States of America, and the Prime Minister made that request public, and the people of Grenada had an opportunity to have their say as to whether they wanted that radar in their island or whether they did not. And we saw the people come out resoundingly and marched and protest against such an arrangement. And to this day, there has been no action. But what did Kamala Persad-Bissessar do to us here in Tobago? She did not even give us the dignity and the opportunity to even have the consideration and the consultation as to whether we wanted that radar. And I'm saying to Tobagonians going forward, this issue of the radar must be decided with your voting finger. If you as a Tobagonian feel, as I do, and many of us do, that we were disrespected and we do not want that radar in Tobago because we understand the threats that it possesses, not just in terms of our safety and our security as to any escalation between the conflict between the United States and Venezuela, but also their health risk. And I am being told by hoteliers as we speak, it is also affecting the livelihoods of Tobagonians, because at this time, there are significant cancellations happening at the level of the hotel industry. As a matter of fact, I'm being told that our major hotel on the island, which is a 200-bedroom hotel, they are only, at this time, an occupancy rate of only 7.25%. That is less than 25 rooms booked, when traditionally around this time, that hotel usually would have bookings upwards of 75% of its room occupancy. And therefore, this issue is not just simply about the traumatic experiences we are experiencing at this time, but it is also impacting our tourism, because also the cruise sector is also reporting cancelled bookings with respect to cruise. And therefore, it is really putting the livelihood and the lives of Tobagonians at risk. And when you look, finally, last evening, I looked on with astonishment and amazement when on the public platform, political platform of the TPP, a senior member of that organization was celebrating this radar, saying to the people, the residents of Bonaparte, Crown Point, and the rest of Tobago, that we should celebrate and clap for this radar as a UNC gift to the people of Tobago. Imagine that. This radar that makes Tobago a prime target in the event of any escalation between conflicting sovereign foreign countries, now is being purported and being sold to Tobagonians as a gift when our lives are at risk. And therefore, I am saying to Tobagonians again, if you want to really send a strong message to both the Prime Minister for her disrespect to Tobagonians, the Chief Secretary for his disregard for Tobagonians and abandoning Tobagonians in a time of great need, then you have to ensure that you register your voting finger and show this current government your rejection of that radar without your consent. And on that note, I thank you, and I look forward to any questions to come at the end.
Thank you very much, Kelvin, and thank you for leading me into just the simple housekeeping that we usually do at these press conferences. Of course, when our MPs are finished speaking, we will take questions from the audience, the journalists who are present, and as usual, just name and the media also that you represent. Kelvin will stay on as well to answer any questions that you may have on the issues that he has raised today. Let me ask our Leader of Government Opposition Business in the Senate, Senator Dr. Amy Brown, to join us at the podium now, please.
Thank you very much. Almost said Minister de Nobrega. MP Simon de Nobrega, the Honourable, recognize the presence of the Leader of the Opposition Chief Whip, and MP Imber. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Trinidad and Tobago is now firmly established within the international news as a base for military operations against Venezuela. If you examine CNN, Reuters, Al Jazeera, Associated Press, we are now being routinely referenced in a significant number of articles and channels covering the tension between the United States of America and Venezuela. The reports from Tobago and the installation of a military radar system have only enhanced those references. So we are now becoming notorious. Not famous for carnival, we're not being referenced for diversity or the other things that we should be proud of, but as a base for wartime operations. But we warned this Prime Minister, we warned her government, we warned the UNC. Right here in this room, we warned them that their rhetoric and their actions are taking this country and our foreign policy in the wrong direction. We warn them that they're taking the reputation and standing of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the wrong direction. They did not listen to good advice. I want to take you back to September 2nd, 2025, when there were international reports of a strike against a suspicious vessel, according to the US military, that was transiting an undefined area of the Caribbean Sea. On September 3rd, the day after, CNN and, of course, local media houses reported the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago giving public praise and cheerleading for these strikes. There was one CNN article on September 3rd with the headline, Trinidad and Tobago leader praises strike and says US should kill all drug traffickers violently. But that strike on September 2nd is now the subject of extreme and intense attention within the United States of America and across the world. It is now the subject of a major legal controversy. It is that very strike, major legal controversy, what seems to be a political scandal involving participants in both parties in the US, and some degree of military controversy as well. Another reflection of the poor judgment of our Prime Minister, who separated herself from CARICOM and who leapt out cheerleading for something that she had very little information on, that she was warned against, but has dragged Trinidad and Tobago into this controversy. So it really is a question of the Prime Minister's judgment. We didn't think it was very good before, but at this stage it appears to be atrocious. And the message to the Prime Minister this morning is that her actions and her rhetoric have not just damaged her own legacy and that of her party, but it's affecting our society and our standing. We warned the Prime Minister that international law was likely being breached with these strikes, and then subsequently, that was right in this room, subsequently the United Nations, France, Colombia, and other governments have come out clearly identifying that international law is being breached. And the Prime Minister has yet to address Trinidad and Tobago on these matters. She cannot just keep popping up online and claiming that everyone asking questions about her policies, about her rhetoric, and about her radars are working for or financed by narco traffickers. I join with the leader of the opposition in rejecting those claims, identifying that they are false, and condemning the Prime Minister for what I find is just laziness. That's a lazy response to genuine questions about government policy. Intellectually lazy. And I don't think the Prime Minister is succeeding in persuading the population by mislabeling and demonizing everyone who dares to question her positions. Sadly, it's also my observation that some of her followers are taking pattern from her. I'll expand a little more on that shortly. The fact is that other countries, including the United States of America, are sharply divided politically on some of these developments. That, though, is the business of those countries. The controversies within the United States of America on these strikes and the actions with Venezuela, that's the business of the United States of America. The President of the USA does not account to us. He does not account to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Do you know who does? Our Prime Minister accounts to us and must be held to account. Every time she is called out, she tries to hide behind the United States of America. The last time I stood here and I said, it's been over 5 months since she addressed the media and addressed the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and she needs to do so urgently. This was her response, and I quote, "If Amory hates the American people," I mean, listen to this laziness. "If Amory hates the American people and the American government, he must give back his US visa and the visas of his family." Prime Minister, that is cowardice. That is intellectually lazy, and I reject it out of hand. Right after that, and comments by one of her Alexanders, the US Embassy actually put out a media release, basically saying, leave our visa policy out of your politics. And right after those unfortunate words by the Prime Minister, both myself and my family received direct death threats from one of the UNC's fanatical supporters. It's been reported in the media. And incidentally, that individual, I understand, is employed in a government division. Stop hiding behind the United States of America. We are questioning your decisions, your rhetoric, your actions, and your policies, and you are accountable to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The truth is, the people of this country are well educated, well connected. They follow international news. They see what's going on in Ukraine. They see what's happening in Gaza and Sudan and other parts of the world. But little did we know that war would come right to our doorsteps, invited by the Prime Minister of our own country, elected in the year 2025. And the example of the radar is really a classic example where a Prime Minister is literally lying to the people and then trying to justify that lie by indicating that there needed to be an element of surprise to surprise these cartels. But installing the radar in the Crown Point International Airport in full view of passers-by and others, it really makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I just want to say there's a serious social cost to what is going on. These deflections, these distractions, saying that relations are normal and we are friendly with the Venezuelan people, that does nothing to change the reality. That's just old talk. The people in Tobago are concerned. Some of them are terrified. The people in Trinidad and Tobago are concerned. And yes, some of them are terrified as to what the future might hold. The Hotel Association in Tobago is reporting cancelled bookings. Potential tourists are changing their minds. People are stocking up right here in this country. People are stocking up on goods, on ring burners, on groceries, etc. Not encouraged by any political actors, but by them looking at the news, listening to the silence of the government, who is not engaging with the population forthrightly, and they are forming their own conclusions. We are about peace, we are about law, we are about the zone of peace. One of the biggest mistakes the Prime Minister made was when she detached herself from that official CARICOM and CELAC position. She called the zone of peace a false ideal. She did so at the United Nations. And then she said that CARICOM is in danger of imploding. Well, the only thing that has imploded is the Prime Minister's foreign policy at this time. I conclude with a question. Is there an alternative to the road the Prime Minister has taken this country down? The answer to that question is yes. There is an alternative to this chaos and confusion. It would involve maintaining friendly, functional relations with all our hemispheric partners and with our neighbors. It would involve Trinidad and Tobago continuing to serve as a focal point for diplomacy and dialogue and peaceful engagement with our neighbors and with all hemispheric partners. It would involve this country remaining rooted in international law. You'd recognize the Prime Minister of our land never makes reference to the UN Charter or international law. She has detached herself completely from that on the road she's taking. And it would involve Trinidad and Tobago continuing to lead CARICOM on regional security, not going off on an expedition of our own, preserving our non-aligned status, preserving our tourism, our economy, and our industries, our market within CARICOM, avoiding isolation, attending CARICOM and CELAC meetings. That's the alternative to what the Prime Minister has, the road the Prime Minister has taken us down. And with respect to narco-trafficking, working collectively to reduce both supply and demand. And that's the side of the equation no one is talking about, as if a war on drugs could succeed without treating with demand. And since I was a little child, there have been wars on drugs in this hemisphere, and the industry has proven extremely resilient. So a one-sided or blind-sided approach is never going to succeed. So stop lying to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister. Address the nation. It's been about 6 months now. You've been hiding from the media and from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And restore the integrity, the dignity, the standards, and the prestige, the values of Trinidad and Tobago to the regional and international stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown. Moving on, can I invite Member of Parliament for the Martin Northeast to the podium? So call member.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Political leader, leader of the opposition, my parliamentary colleagues, the media. I'm just going to briefly speak about an issue with a shortage of pharmaceuticals within our local health system. I'm told there are serious shortages of drugs that are used for cardiovascular diseases, heart diseases, for hypertension, for cancer, and so on. I'm told that the reason is the current administration is simply not paying the suppliers of pharmaceuticals because these are all being labeled by the current government as being P&M suppliers. We're also told that the plan is of the current administration to import pharmaceuticals from India using a local agent of their choice. I know the media has very good investigative skills. So now that I've told you all of that, the plan is to starve the traditional suppliers of pharmaceuticals of money, just don't pay them, use the excuse that they are P&M, and then set up an arrangement where the $1 billion expenditure on pharmaceuticals, that's how much is spent every year, about $1 billion, will now be done through a local agent importing generics from India and other places. So that's just food for thought. I also want to talk about the legislation that will be debated in the Parliament on Friday. At close to 11 p.m. on Tuesday night, I saw a message come through on my phone from the Parliament, and that message told me that on Friday, the government will be debating the Finance Bill 2025. Note the time, 11 p.m. Tuesday night. I just happened to be looking at my phone. When I looked at the legislation, it's 44 pages long. That's unusual. Very, very unusual to give parliamentarians just a couple days' notice for a complex piece of legislation. As I said, 44 pages long. The legislation does not, as the Prime Minister has alleged, and just as an aside, I was just shown a comment made by the Prime Minister, and I endorse the comments made by our leader of government, of opposition business, in the Senate, Dr. Brown. There is something wrong with the Prime Minister. The things that she's saying don't make any sense and indicate to me that something's not right in terms of the way she approaches matters. I mean, when you add up everything, kill them all violently, bust their head, eat a food filth. I mean, imagine you're referring to senior members of the legal profession as filth. That was really pushing the envelope in terms of offensive language. And then, of course, the famous cuff you down and so on. I understand this morning she has described me as evil. I just saw it. Apparently some online story in the Express. I'm evil and gross. Just because I, from time to time, post or put things on Twitter, which is now called X. That's the reason. I'm evil because I criticize the government on Twitter. And the Prime Minister also went on to say, well, nobody's interested in my pathetic little post on Twitter. Well, that's interesting because I did a tweet shortly after the government canceled the Independence Parade. And in that tweet, it was a very innocuous tweet. All I said was 2 weeks after the government canceled the Independence Parade, they boycotted their own day of prayer. That's all my tweet said. It's not earth-shattering. It got 53,000 views. And I don't have robots. I don't even know what a robot is. So 53,000 people looked at that simple little tweet. So I understand the problem. I did a tweet on this bill, and let me just check and see how many. Check it now. 12,621 people have looked at this tweet. I did it yesterday. I don't know where it will reach. So I understand the Prime Minister's problem. I just do a couple words on Twitter. 50,000 people look at it. 49,000 of them agree with me. They have an avalanche of trolls that come out, but they are in the majority. They are in the minority. I understand her problem, and I will continue to tweet. This is clearly an attempt at intimidation. So let's go to the finance bill. The Prime Minister alleged that the finance bill simply implements what was stated in the budget. To use the very kind language of Dr. Brown, that's a lie. And let me tell you what it actually does. Some very dangerous things inside of here. Clause 3 of the Finance Bill 2025 increases the penalty for a raffle or charitable lottery that is not in compliance with the provisions of the Gambling Act. And those provisions are simple. For example, if you have a raffle and you don't call out the results of the raffle inside the premises in which the raffle is being held, at the time the raffle is being held, you would currently face a fine of $750. Now, these things could happen. A church, a school could have a raffle, and they publish the results the next day, or they go outside and they publish the results. The fine is currently $750. They're increasing that to $30,000. Who is the target in that sort of thing? That wasn't in the budget. Clause 5, this certainly was not in the budget, allows the politically appointed governor of the central bank to be given authority to create official economic statistics. A political appointee, not a public servant, because countries all over the world rely on public officers to jealously and professionally guard statistical data, such as GDP and inflation and so on, important statistics. Now, the politically appointed governor of the central bank will be given authority to make up his own economic data. And this will now become the official data of the country. Unheard of. Previously, it was public servants like the Registrar General and so on who would be allowed to deal with specific, very narrow data. That wasn't in the budget. Clause 8 implements the first increase in national insurance contributions. That was in the budget. And it changes the contribution rate from 16.2% of insurable earnings to 19.2%. And let me give you an example. The NIS contribution of a typical wage earner earning $7,400 a month, that's average, will increase from $86.40 per week, or $374 per month, to $102.40 per week, or $443 per month, an increase of 19%. And another increase is planned for next year, taking it up to 40% in all. Clause 10, I didn't see this in the budget, increases the fine for not registering the transfer of a vehicle after 7 days of change of possession from $200 to $500. And the fine for operating a vehicle for a purpose that it is not registered for from $8,000 to $12,000. And this is targeted at the small man. I remember reading Lee Kuan Yew's book about how he developed Singapore. And I remember him specifically talking about issues relating to public transportation. And he said that there were many pirate taxis and unregistered public service vehicles operating in Singapore. But he could not outlaw them or wipe them out of existence until he improved our public transportation system. This is aimed at those little white vans that you see around, the unregistered taxis. The fine now will be $12,000. And then there is a general doubling of fines for various infractions, such as failing to renew your driver's permit. This happens to all of us. We don't remember the date on which our driver's permit expires. That's a common thing with people. When that happens to you now, it will cost you $650. That wasn't in the budget. Clause 14 is a very curious amendment. That certainly was not in the budget. It increases the minimum allowable limit for external foreign loans from $50 million to $45 billion. Let me repeat that. The current minimum allowable limit or maximum allowable limit for external foreign loans is $50 million. It is now being increased to $45 billion. And it's curious because it's not clear whether this will increase the limit from the current $30 billion for foreign loans to $75 billion or $45 billion. It's not clear. But what it certainly does is increases the limit for foreign borrowing by at least $15 billion. It's obvious that the government wants to go foreign to borrow money for whatever it plans to do. That is very, very dangerous because our current foreign debt or external debt to GDP ratio is now about 21%. This will take it up to over 30%. And that has always been flagged by the rating agencies, by Moody's and by Standard & Poor's. Our external debt to GDP ratio has always been flagged as being right on the margin, the threshold for a downgrade. But they want to increase our foreign debt by $15 billion. A certain downgrade will follow. That wasn't in the budget. Clause 15 is extremely dangerous. This is an attack on institutions, I dare say an attack on democracy, and an attack on privacy. Clause 15 changes the composition of the Board of Inland Revenue, as it now stands, from 5 public officers. These are people who would come through the ranks and be promoted and eventually be promoted to become a commissioner of Inland Revenue. There are 5 of them right now. It changes the composition to 6 public officers, and here's where the danger comes in, and 2 political appointees. That is unheard of in a democratic society. Private political appointees will now sit on the Board of Inland Revenue. They will have access to your private and personal tax information. They will have the power to influence assessments, refunds, returns, and enforcement. And I am pretty sure this will offend the Global Forum requirements for tax transparency. I can't believe that the UNC would want to do this. Why on earth would they want to put political appointees on the Board of Inland Revenue? What for? And you know, you look at their appointees, people before the courts, they're putting on boards of important state enterprises. So I would not be surprised to see 2 questionable characters appear now on the Board of Inland Revenue after this is passed. It's frightening. Clause 18 speaks about the asset levy on the banks and insurance companies. That was in the budget. Clause 19, very clumsy, convoluted, excessively bureaucratic, landlord surcharge. It actually goes from clause 19 to clause 91. I have not seen this level of bureaucracy in legislation before. It doesn't make any sense. The 2010 census or 2011 census told us there were about 78,000 persons engaged in some kind of rental arrangement, whether it is renting a complete residence, or whether they're renting a room in their homes, or whether they have a little annex and they're renting, there were about 78,000, and that is what was reported. And that was 15 years ago. I dare say there are 100,000 rental units in Trinidad and Tobago today. Some of them go from the very small, where somebody's just renting a room in their home to earn a little extra income. A couple, an elderly couple, has built an annex next to their home and they rent it out. There's so many of those. And then persons may have a small dwelling house and they're renting it out and so on. Apartments. Why on earth would the government do this? You have to register as a landlord. So all these little people who rent in a room in their house just to earn a little extra change, this is targeting them. All these elderly people renting a little annex, this is targeting them. You have to register. You have to fill out a form. You have to identify who the tenant is. If the tenant changes, you have to go and register again. This is what this government is doing to little people in this country. 100,000 residential units. I dare say more than 50,000 of them are what I just spoke about, the little mom and pop arrangements, the little room. So in addition to increasing rents, because you have to hire an accountant now, I've looked at it, it's about 70 clauses. You have to hire an accountant to go through all of this, to register your properties and to register your tenants and to declare everything. So you, the little person who rented a little annex in the house, you have to hire an accountant now. And if you don't, well, massive fines and penalties coming at you. Why on earth are they doing this? Why don't they use the same Board of Inland Revenue to go after? Because this is clearly an effort to deal with tax evasion. Why don't you use the same Board of Inland Revenue? What are you doing this for? And when I look at the actual rate, property tax on a typical apartment, let's say somebody renting it for $5,000, or apartments rent for $10,000, they rent for $15,000. But let's use a $5,000 a month apartment as an average. People rent for much less than that, I know. So that's $60,000 a year, and when you do the maths, you take out the 10% for voids. This is what was in the Property Tax Act. And then you apply the 2% rate, you would get a property tax of $1,000. This is now going to double that. And in some cases, the property tax is going to be 5 times, the landlord surcharge is going to be 5 times what the property tax was. Now, I took a look at what the lady who wants to cuff me down said back in 2024 and back in 2020. And in 2024, the Prime Minister, the member for Siparia, went off on a tirade about taxation and said that increasing taxes doesn't work. Promised to reduce taxes. Okay? I go to a report on the Parliament. Opposition leader Kamala Persad-Bissessar, this is in 2024, has warned that more taxes are on the horizon, as she claims government will be seeking to cover a fiscal deficit which is expected to climb beyond $9 billion. And she goes on about alleged increases in value-added tax, cuts in social programs, removal of CDAP, and so on. And then says this, the minister, talking about me, has a history of borrowing, increasing the borrowing limit. They are increasing the borrowing limit, as I just told you, by $15 billion. They're increasing taxes. And goes on to say this, you cannot tax a country into prosperity. What is really going on in this country? And I challenge the media, because you are quiet, you are silent. The things that this government is doing are beyond belief, and nobody says anything. If it was the PNM, there'd be front page editorials for a year. So I challenge the media. Go and look at what Kamala Persad-Bissessar said about reducing taxes, about not being able to tax yourself into prosperity, about saying that when she came into government, she would reduce taxes. Go and look at what she said. And now look at what they're doing. They're increasing a landlord surcharge that is 5 times the property tax, affecting 100,000. How are they going to manage that? How is the Board of Inland Revenue going to police 100,000 property rentals? How? Where are you getting the staff to do that? Go outside there and make sure every single landlord in the country registered and registers every time your tenant leaves and a new one comes in. How are you doing that? It's ridiculous. It's not going to work. They just want to punish people. And then Clause 91 introduces the electricity surcharge. Again, increasing the cost of living for everybody. And then this one, Clause 97 introduces a tax on plastic bags and packages. Cost of living going up again. Clause 20 quadruples the license fee for amusement gaming machines. And this wasn't in the budget. Clause 21 increases the fees for brewing beer and rum by volume. So the more you do business, the more economic activity you create, the more people you employ in the brewing of beer and rum, the more tax you have to pay. This is regressive taxation. There is nothing in here. The electricity surcharge, the landlord surcharge, nothing in here to stimulate the economy and create jobs. All this will do is encourage more and more tax evasion and punish little people. So if, for pointing these things out, for continuously updating the population on what this crazy government is doing, this deceitful government is doing, I am evil. Well, evil is as evil does. I'll accept the label. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MP Humbert. Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving to, of course, the question period now, but can I ask a simple deviation that all of our questions for the minority leader, if we can pose those questions first, and then we will be able to move to everyone who is at the press conference in person. So I don't know if the technical team can get it's up and ready, and if we can move the mic around.
Anything? Kelvin?
If there are any questions for
Okay. Anybody has a question?
yes. So if you're
Good morning, Kim Bodram from The Express. You're going to forgive me if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, but I think that the radar in Tobago is really the thing that is most topical right now in terms of its presence just being troubling to the minds of Tobagonians. What I would have gotten from one or two people is that as they go about their daily business now, they have this radar to the back of their mind and wondering, what it's going to attract. So I think I would ask you again about the mood in Tobago regarding that today. Well, right now.
Could you just repeat the last part of the question? I heard road. Is it road?
No, I think the mood in Tobago, sorry, is what I'm asking
radar.
about. The mood in Tobago, Tobago is a happy place. And so has it affected the mood in Tobago? Is it visible?
People, but right now we are literally living on the edge. It is really a traumatic period for Tobagonians because, as I said, from that morning till now, it is like every time you hear some kind of movement or anything, that it startles you, you're very, we're in a mood of panic at this time because it is like any moment this thing can escalate. And as I said, because of the presence of the radar, it now makes Tobago a prime target. So notwithstanding we are Trinidad and Tobago and we saw the position and foreign policy position of the Prime Minister, but for many Tobagonians before now, we felt isolated from all that was happening, only to find out that we are now placed in the middle of the action if anything is to escalate, because as you know, this is a military grade type radar system. And notwithstanding the purpose that we are being told, we, as Mr. London, former Chief Secretary, used to say to us, you're big and you have sense. And we understand the correlation between the presence of this radar and some of the activities happening at the geopolitical level between the US and Venezuela. And you could recall this radar thing came just on the eve of the visit of the senior military personnel from the United States visiting the Prime Minister, etc. So therefore, Tobagonians are really in a state of panic. We are extremely concerned, and many people are literally scared for their lives.
Go ahead, Akash. So we have no more questions for Kelvin and Tobago. You all have allowed him off freely. Well done. Thank you so much, Kelvin.
Thank you so much.
So let's move on.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Akash Samaru, Guardian Media. My first couple of questions would be for the opposition leader.
Sure. Opposition leader.
Good day, ma'am.
Hi, Akash.
There's been a lot of talk about Tobago's place on the National Security Council. I have a question. I mean, you've been in the cabinet for some time, and we have some experienced politicians with us as well. Why did the PNM never put the chief secretary on the National Security Council? Was there a rationale for that?
Well, I can't say if there was a rationale, but what I do know is that there are meetings. Specifically, I know that the witch Dr. Rowley would have spoken to the chief secretary as it relates to national security. And I have been present when the chief secretary, not this one, but I remember, because I'm here 2025, when the chief secretary attended cabinet meetings.
Okay. At the U.S. level, there are bipartisan national security groups. Do you believe a member of the opposition should also be on the National Security Council?
Well, I mean, it's not something that we have discussed. It's not usual in our Westminster-style system for that to happen. But what I have said is that, I mean, our government and the opposition, that there's no reason why you can't collaborate on issues. I mean, I made it very clear when I became the leader of the opposition of being willing to sit with the Honourable Prime Minister and the opposition, particularly on sensitive and other issues. I mean, because we do know that there's always a perception that there is this antagonism and there's never any room to collaborate. I recalled Mr. Manning, when he was the Prime Minister, there was actually meetings, if you recall, where the two parties came together. There was a delegation from, the UNC at the time and from the PNM. And at times there was actually some agreements on the way forward. So I think it's always desirable to have, even if you don't talk about having somebody on a particular committee, but if you're not on the committee, does not mean that you can't find a mechanism for collaboration, especially on sensitive issues.
But specific to the NSC, is it something the PNM would be open to if an invitation is extended for the opposition to sit on the NSC? That's something that you would be willing to do?
Well, there's nothing wrong with considering, but I wouldn't give a position now, certainly without a matter like that having been developed as policy in the party.
You asked a lot of questions to the Prime Minister earlier.
Yes, yeah.
If Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar decides to ignore those questions, what is your next step?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it is ignored, but the point about it is, as it relates to sensitive matters, you can't just ignore it. I mean, even if the Prime Minister refuses to answer, which, I mean, I recall she said some time ago that I should go and read the Express if I want to find out particular information. And in some instances, to give a tweet. But as the opposition, it would be our responsibility, once there are matters in the public domain that affect the people of Trinidad and Tobago, it is our responsibility to bring to the attention not just the Prime Minister, but also the people of Trinidad and Tobago, as it relates to the positives and where there are pitfalls.
Okay. If I may also ask a question of Minister Imbert, oh,
Sure.
MP Imbert, sorry. Mr. Imbert, when you would have wanted the Revenue Authority, there were accusations that you as minister would have been able to access citizens' tax info, and you would have said that, correct me if I'm wrong, that Section 4 of the Income Tax Act, which is a constitutionally protected provision, explicitly prohibits this, and you added that act does not list the finance minister as a delegated authority that could receive that information. Would Section 4 also block these political appointees that you said could be put on the board of the BIR? Would Section 4 also apply to them as well?
It is actually in the Revenue Authority Act. Because remember, the argument was about the Revenue Authority Act, and the false argument was that that piece of legislation would allow the minister to get access to personal and private tax information. That piece of legislation actually prohibits that. Okay? It prohibits it. But if these private individuals who are not public officers are placed on the board of Inland Revenue, they can access the information. Clause 4 prevents dissemination or publication of the information. In other words, it prevents sharing it with somebody else. But it means that non-public officers will now be able to access all of the information of the Board of Inland Revenue. But to deal with a specific thing, that was a false allegation because the Revenue Authority Act expressly prohibited the Minister of Finance from getting access to personal and private tax information.
And just still on the finance bill, clause 2 of the bill, I was looking through it, would amend the Prime Minister's Pension Act and substitute a new subsection to provide for new rates for the payment of pensions to a Prime Minister. Could you explain?
Well, that is consistent with what the UNC did with respect to amending the Prime Minister's pension arrangement. So I didn't see that as a significant clause.
I just wanted to say something in relation. So Akash, just as I sat down, I think you would know that there is a Joint Select Committee of Parliament that deals with national security, amongst the many others, that allows for the bipartisan approach. Of course, the government will have the majority, but at least it allows you to be able to discuss matters. As to whether such a matter would ever come before the committees is a different thing. But you would also recall, I think it might have been the OS matter that was fast-tracked and came before the Joint Select Committee. So that at least allows for that, what you have raised.
But has the JSC on that met at all since the new administration?
I don't believe so. You are on the committee, Marvin? Yes. Yes. Marvin is on that committee.
So none at all since?
No, not since. Okay.
Hi, Ms. Beckles, Gregory McBurney, Trinidad Newsday. How do you respond to claims that the government finds itself in the situation it does now, partly because of the SOFA agreement signed under the PNM government?
Well, I'll say that is absolutely false. Even if you argue that is the case. I mean, what stops the Prime Minister, if you recall, was in the United States speaking with the Secretary of State. So looking at the SOFA, I don't see anything in that agreement which mandates, directs, insists, authorizes, or puts the government in a position where they have no other choice but to do what they're doing. I mean, you must recall that the Honourable Prime Minister indicated that she requested the radar. So where does SOFA talk about a radar? SOFA doesn't talk about a radar. I mean, at the end of the day, if the assumption is that SOFA, an agreement entered to by the last government, binds this government, then, that has to be said. And if you recall, it was in 2013, I may be wrong, but it was in 2013 that this government renewed the SOFA agreement. Yeah.
Ms. Beckles, did you have sight of that particular SOFA agreement signed between Dr. Rowley and Washington? And I ask this in particular because my understanding is that SOFA agreements differ from country to country, and whereas on the U.S. Department of State website, some agreements are there, not all. Ours is not there.
Well,
not
I mean,
public.
I didn't see the actual signed agreement, but we discussed it. And I know that there were some amendments, there were some concerns, but nothing specifically that mandates the government to do what it is that the Honourable Prime Minister gives the impression that they don't have a choice. In other words, that if you have Marines coming or whatever, that they don't have a choice. I mean, there isn't, if you, I mean, as it relates to sovereignty, I mean, any government, if you have a challenge as it relates to any agreement you will sign, there,
And
philosophy is always there.
as it relates to that particular, the most recent SOFA agreement signed, is there any reason why it is private, why it hasn't been made public, why we don't know about it?
Well, I, as far as I know, all previous agreements have been made public. This SOFA agreement would have been signed, I think, was at the end of late last year. But I mean, I'm sure certainly you don't put it up necessarily right away, but there is nothing that would stop the government from putting up the SOFA agreement. And I'm sure at some point in time, if we were in office, the SOFA agreement would have been put up. It's an agreement that is reviewed almost all the time. Yeah, and it's a negotiation between the country, the US and, yeah.
I do have some other questions.
Sure.
There has been some speculation over Monday's briefing and why it has been cancelled. Are you able to say why that was cancelled?
No, simply we wanted to incorporate Tobago. Yes. There's no speculation about that. And we felt that when we got the information about the radar, that it would be good to, and so we discussed that, and Monday was not convenient. So there's nothing to speculate about. I mean,
Right.
we have cancelled our press briefings before.
Yes. And of course, last Friday you would have piloted a motion which ended prematurely, I would say. And
Yes.
there has been a lot of criticism over it. Your colleague, Mr. Gonzalez, was blamed for egging you on to prematurely end it. Is there an explanation? What exactly happened?
Well, listen, I think one of the most important things to recognize is people believe that I won't be able to speak again. That's the main concern. And it's my motion, and I will be able to speak at the end. I wasn't able to speak then because of having said beg to move. So that any speculation that I was egged on and there was some conspiracy and some sort of setup, I mean, this is not the first time something like that happened. Of course, people want to say, oh, you've been in Parliament a long time, so that should not have been happening. The point about it is you could be in Parliament for years and you can make a mistake. I don't have a problem in saying that at that time, I mean, the way things go sometimes, you know, so people want to take it and, you know, I mean, right? But the truth is that, I mean, the Honourable Marvin Gonzalez spoke, the Honourable Stuart Young spoke on the same motion. And as I said, I will be able to speak. And the motion was amended, and following the amendment, the debate continued. So in other words, what was there continued to be part of the debate. Okay, so Mr. Imbo just wants to say something, so I think that is you know, the most I will say for now. Sure. Are you going to ask another question on it? Because Mr. Imbo wanted to say something. On the same thing? Okay.
We had a situation in Parliament on that day where the Speaker called upon the Leader of the Opposition to continue more than once, maybe over 3 times. He said, you know, go ahead, go ahead. And the Leader of Government Business, Mr. Padarat, objected violently, screamed, and screamed at the Speaker more than once. And eventually the Speaker suspended the sitting to go and seek advice on whether he had the discretion to allow the Leader of the Opposition to continue. Came back and said he was told he did not. Now, I want to refer you to a debate on the Police Service Commission on the 13th of June, 2025, this year. And this is the contribution of the Minister of Homeland Security. He read out the recitals to the motion. This is to appoint nominate a commissioner. Actually, it was the commissioner, Mr. Alistair Guevara. And he read out the recitals, whereas it is expedient to approve the notification, be it resolved that the notification of the President of the nomination by the Public Service Commission of Mr. Alistair Guevara to the Office of Commissioner of Police be approved. This is June 2025. And he says, I beg to move. Same thing that the Leader of the Opposition did. And this is what the Speaker said at that time. Remember, before you beg to move the motion, can I inquire as to whether you have a contribution to the motion? Identical situation. Honourable Roger Alexander. Yes, sir. Mr. Speaker, proceed to do now if you do. Honourable Roger Alexander, thank you. And then he proceeds to make his contribution. So in June of 2025, the Speaker exercised a discretion to allow a member of the government who had said, I beg to move before presenting a motion. There was no question then. He exercised a discretion and then told us when the same thing happened to the Leader of the Opposition, just a couple months later, he has no discretion. Okay? Those are facts.
The Prime Minister this morning in the Express newspaper would have criticized state agencies and the former PNM administration for, quote-unquote, their role in the pharmaceutical monopoly via the disbursement of Forex, etc. She accused the PNM of, quote-unquote, fostering monopolistic behavior in the cement and quarrying sectors. Leader of the Opposition, are you able to comment on these allegations?
Okay, so you talked about the health sector.
Pharmaceutical, and then she went on to accuse of the same monopolistic behavior in the cement and quarrying sectors.
Well, the thing about the pharmaceuticals, you would notice that there's a lot of information. I didn't see similar information as it relates to cement and quarrying. And certainly as it relates, Mr. Imbert and I discussed that because he's a former Minister of Health. But let me say from where I sit that looking at the details given by the Prime Minister as it relates to that, as the governor of the Inter-American Development Bank, one of the interventions was to work with the Port of Spain Health Authority as well as the Eastern Health Authority to deal with the whole issue of drugs, the length of prescription, the length of time it takes, and to put in place a new system. Because when the Ministry of Health got into office in 2015, as I recall, that was a big matter that was raised. So now you have a modernized system that allows you to track the drugs, where you could track the patients in terms of prescription, where you would know much easier, and that is because there's a new mechanism put in place. As it relates to a monopoly, I cannot really comment on that. But particularly as it relates to the issue of quarrying, because you would recall that this is a matter that came up as it relates to the state of emergency. As it relates to the state of emergency, and I know the article was there in The Guardian because I read the article, there was this allegation that a particular minister was being threatened by certain quarry operations in the Grandy area, and we see that one person has now been arrested. As a matter of fact, 2 persons have been arrested as it relates to that. As far as I know, the Minister of Energy at the time, the Honourable Stuart Young, I know that matter actually came before the Parliament. I recall that there has been a substantial increase in fines as it relates to people involved in quarrying, so I cannot say that there was a monopoly. What I know is under the PNM, efforts were put in place to address, which is a matter that has been in the public domain where people have been really upset about it for quite a long time.
Aside from the alleged pharmaceutical monopoly, the issue of 800 million in expired medication came about in, I believe, the GSC of Parliament. Have you at all spoken to former Health Minister Terence D'Alsing as to how this would have happened, and is the public owed an explanation?
Well, what I saw, I did speak with him, and I know he has sent me quite a number of articles specifically dealing with the issue of shortage of drugs globally. So in other words, it's not just here in Trinidad and Tobago you have the shortage of drugs, you have a shortage of drugs globally. And there's also the debate as it relates to the quality of drugs. I mean, some people are of the view that small islands in particular have this challenge where you are always on the lower end, and the likelihood is that in terms of the quality of drugs and expired drugs, that's a possibility. But if you look at the debate, I mean, I looked at BBC and a couple articles today, it is a big debate that is going on globally about the expiration of drugs.
Okay, my final question is for Dr. Brown.
Okay.
Are you
But can I
satis-
ask Mr. Imbert if he wanted to say anything else on the issue of the drugs, of the expiration, as a former Minister of Health?
I think rather than pursuing this monopoly story, I mean, it's important. That's a matter for the Fair Trading Commission, by the way, not the Ministry of Health. You need to look into the whole question of expired drugs. It's a big problem. Apparently, suppliers, international suppliers, force local agents to take huge quantities of drugs because it's not in their financial interest to supply small quantities. So there are drugs that arrive that can't be used before they expire. And there is a lot of expired drugs in the system. And these things are very dangerous. And again, since you all are all brilliant investigative journalists, I suggest you look into the whole question of expired drugs. The monopoly thing, you need to ask the Fair Trading Commission about that, because they are the ones that are adjudicated on the whole question of a monopoly in the pharmaceutical supply industry. Okay?
Thank you. Dr. Brown, just my final question. Are you satisfied with police action over the individual who would have threatened, of course, you and your family? Would you consider it swift? It happened in a matter of days?
Well, I don't know if you have any details on the police action. All I would have seen is a media release which indicated that charges have been brought. I've already seen questions which really serve to compare the actions taken in this particular case with other cases of recent public concern, such as the threats, indirect threats, focused on the Prime Minister and her location, etc., etc. So I don't know if the question is whether I'm satisfied with the police action. The fact is that it's in the public domain that charges have been brought. I said right at the beginning that let the law take its course. And my bigger concern is to be frank with you, my bigger concern is the politics of hate and division and the narrative that is being advanced. Some of it seems to be imported from abroad, which is serving to polarize the society and possibly radicalize individuals even more than before. So you're seeing with some frequency now, persons coming out. I saw there was somebody calling the CPO a PNM, and you could think that wrongfully, but then to attach that to threats and so on, that's not the Trinidad and Tobago I grew up with, and that's where my concern is, Urvashi, where some of our public officials, and I really want to say the Prime Minister specifically has a responsibility to moderate her language. There were examples given by MP Imbert and others, and myself during this media conference, where the Prime Minister seems to be going down a road of very reckless rhetoric, aggressive language, wild accusations without substance. You're dealing with a broad population. You're dealing with supporters, some of which might be susceptible to taking the wrong decisions and actions based on your rhetoric. I recall a few years ago, some years ago, there was a lady and a child was struck by a vehicle. I think it was a vehicle associated with uniformed services in Sealots. And there were some protests. And a journalist at that time came out on social media and said something about killing the protesters, shooting them in their heads, and planting cabbage on them. He would have subsequently apologized. But that's just, to me, a sign for us. There are persons of that inclination in society, and we, government and all other political actors, need to be very prudent in our language and in the example that we are setting for our supporters and the people out there. And the Prime Minister has been negligent in that regard, and from some of her output has been, in my view, feeding this polarization within the society. That's not what she promised us when she was sworn in. No one would love Trinidad and Tobago like she's gone very far from that now. And, well, a word to the wise, hopefully.
Right, Dr. Brown, before you go, I mean, of course, I'm sorry that you and your family would have had to go through something like this. How has it affected your family at all, and have you had to put additional security arrangements, etc., in place? And also, are any of your colleagues as well worried about their safety in light of the threat that you would have received?
Well, I don't want to get too much into the minutiae and details. I haven't really made this about me personally. The fact is, all members of society are at risk. Those engaged in public life would obviously be concerned about threats like this being made, especially directed against our children, etc. I have taken the steps within my means. I want to indicate that there's a misconception that public officials, and the UNC has fed this in the past, ministers, all of you have your security detail. That is not true. That is not true. There were recent lies being perpetrated that everyone has an arsenal of weapons. That is also not true. But when you put this mischief out there, it really affects the public perception and the risk and safety balance in the eyes of the public. So with respect to me and my family, thank God we are okay. We rely on the good services of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And the concern, I must say, the concern and positivity of many people of Trinidad and Tobago, colleagues, those, some on the other side of the aisle, I want to say, a few. And other good people in Trinidad and Tobago. They're more good than bad in this country.
Just allow me to speak briefly on this. I saw a comment from Dr. Brown that it was after he criticized the actions of the Prime Minister that he got the death threat. Now the Prime Minister has threatened to cuff me down, has said today I'm an evil man. So I sincerely hope that this is not going to cause any of her supporters to make similar threats against me. And I would repeat our request to the Prime Minister, cool it, calm down, stop this violent language. Because even though you may think it's a joke, I saw it somewhere that they said it was a joke, the cuff down thing. Your supporters may not. You're endangering the lives of people. And just to add what Dr. Brown just said, in my 33 years in public life, I have 22 years experience as a cabinet minister. I never had a security detail or blue lights. So that is just an outrageous lie outside there. It was only when I acted as Prime Minister, I was forced, because of protocol, to be driven around by security in official vehicles. But outside of those periods, in almost 34 years, I've never had a security detail or blue lights on any of my vehicles. I just want to make that clear, because these are terrible lies out there. And this nonsense about guns too. The vast majority of PNM MPs do not have a gun. So that again is a terrible statement to be made by an UNC official.
Mr. But before you go, one other question. We'd have seen yesterday, Newsday ran the story this morning that in terms of the agreement between the PSC and the CPO, and that it includes debt relief. So, for example, public servants who have mortgages with the Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Bank, those will be either waived or eased or some sort of, debt relief. What are your thoughts on the agreement so far? If
I
have you had
don't
a-
have a copy of the agreement. That's the second time you've done that to me, You're talking about something written in the papers. I can't go on that. I would have to actually see the agreement before I make any kind of useful comment. Okay, so wait until I get it, and then we could talk.
Can I
okay?
urge you perhaps to read the news data?
No, I certainly would not. I certainly would not use that newspaper as a credible source. Thank you.
Anybody else?
We have Akash, you
Yeah, I
get the
wanted to
privilege of
just
the
ask
last question.
Dr. Brown would have mentioned that the person charged with death threat works at a government division or a government agency. Can you share which agency? Is it a ministry? Is it something? Can you move a little more specific?
I'd rather not. The fact is, my understanding,
Do you want to come here?
I don't want to be too specific because I don't want the reverse to happen and the wrong kind of attention to be placed where there's any sense or prospect of a threat in reverse. What I can say is what has been shared with me is that this is someone engaged in a particular government department as an employee paid by the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago.
And just one more for Mr. Imbert. I was trying to seek a response from the finance minister to some of the claims you would have made just now. And he's inferring that maybe you are a landlord and that's why you're so upset about the surcharge. No, well, he said ask him. So we're asking him.
Let me invite
Yeah.
Mr. Imbert to deal with that last question.
I was just told that Mr. Tanku is communicating with you directly on your phone. I was just told that. I'm just saying that's what I was told. It's okay.
And I know who told you too.
I didn't accept it as being completely accurate. But that's what I was told. All the questions you were asking came from him.
Nah, not all the question. I would have asked him for a
It's
response
okay.
so
I
that
said
we
it's
could,
okay.
you know how we have a deadline.
Mr.
So as you make the claim, I ask him for a response.
It's
And that was one of the
okay.
responses.
It's all right. I
Yeah.
didn't take it seriously. But clearly there's some communication. The fact is, yes, I do own rental properties. I have an accountant. I will be able to register. I'm not talking about myself. I am talking about and I want to emphasize this because there's a tendency sometimes to throw out a red herring to distract. Let me repeat. I do have rental properties. I have an accountant, and I will be registering with the Board of Inland Revenue and in full compliance with the law as I am in all my business activities. This is not for me. I'm not the problem. The problem is all the thousands, the 50,000 little people. That's the point I want to make. The people will be affected by this. The little old person, the pensioner who is renting out a room in their house, who is using that additional income to survive. They won't be able to comply with this convoluted law. I told you there are over 50 clauses in this bill about registration. And the fact that within 30 days, if your tenant moves out or you throw them out for non-payment of rent, you have to re-register. And if you miss that, you committed an offense and you're subject to heavy penalties. How are these little old people going to do that? That is the evil in this presentation. Okay?
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, both the media who is present and, of course, all of you at home watching us online, including the Minister of Finance. We have come to the end of the opposition's press conference. Reach home safe. Thank you.